long before the wooden hulls of European galleons broke the gray horizon of the Atlantic. Long before the first maps were drawn or the first coins were minted in the New World, the Americas existed in a state of vast, primordial silence. It was a silence broken only by the wind moving through the tall grasses of the plains and the deep, rhythmic breathing of the ancient forests. Here, in a landscape that stretched from the frozen tundra of the north to the steaming jungles of the south, the earth offered up a peculiar gift. It was not a fruit, nor a grain to fill the belly, but a leafy, green plant that would eventually conquer the globe. This was Nicotiana*, the tobacco plant. To the indigenous peoples who walked these lands for millennia, this plant was not a crop to be sold, nor a habit to be consumed in idleness. It was a sacred technology, a bridge built of smoke and ash that connected the heavy soil of the mortal world to the ethereal realm of the spirits. We must strip away our modern understanding of tobacco, the cellophane packs, the warning labels, the industrial additives, and visualize the plant in its original, savage form. The variety cultivated by the ancients was primarily Nicotiana rustica *, a species far more potent and violent than the mild leaf used in modern cigarettes. It grew wild and green, a short, scrubby bush with yellow flowers that held a terrifying power within its chemistry. It contained concentrations of nicotine so high that it could induce hallucinations, catatonia, or even death if handled without reverence. It was thunder in the blood, a botanical entity that demanded respect. To the tribes of the Americas, from the Huron in the north to the Yanomami in the south, the cultivation of this plant was a religious duty. It was believed to be a gift from the Creator, the very breath of the Great Spirit made manifest in leaf and stem. Picture the scene in the deep winter of the pre-Columbian era. The night is absolute, a velvet darkness pressing against the skin of the earth. Inside a lodge covered in buffalo hides or cedar bark, a fire crackles, casting long, dancing shadows against the walls. A shaman sits cross-legged before the flames. In his hands, he holds an object of immense power, the calumet. This is the sacred pipe, often carved from the red pipestone found in the quarries of what is now Minnesota stone that was believed to be the frozen blood of the ancestors. The pipe stem is long, decorated with eagle feathers and porcupine quills, representing the spine of the world. The shaman reaches into a medicine pouch and withdraws the dried, crumbled leaves of the rustica *. He packs the bowl with slow, deliberate movements. This is not a leisure activity. It is a liturgy. When he brings a burning coal to the bowl, the leaves ignite, glowing with a fierce orange heat. He draws the smoke into his mouth, not to satisfy a craving, but to initiate a communion. As he exhales, the gray smoke does not merely vanish into the air. It rises. In the cosmology of the indigenous peoples, smoke was the only substance that moved naturally from the earth to the sky. It was a visible prayer, a gray ribbon carrying the messages of the people directly to the ears of the Creator. It was the medium through which the human voice could transcend the human condition. The smoke fills the lodge, thick and aromatic, smelling of earth and musk. It induces a trance-like state, a dizziness that the ancients interpreted as the loosening of the soul from the body. In this altered state, the shaman could wander the spirit world, speaking with the ancestors, bargaining with the wind, or diagnosing the spiritual sickness of his tribe. The tobacco was a pharmakon in the truest Greek sense of the word, both a medicine and a poison. depending on the dosage and the intent. It was blown over warriors before battle to grant them the courage of the bear and the vision of the hawk. It was blown over the sick to drive away the malevolent spirits of illness, the smoke acting as a fumigation for the soul. But the power of the leaf extended beyond the individual. It was the glue that held the society together. In the silence of the ancient forests, where no written contracts existed, the sharing of the pipe was the highest form of law. When two men smoked together, they were mixing their breath with the breath of the Great Spirit. To lie after smoking the pipe was to invite cosmic retribution. It sealed treaties between warring nations and ended blood feuds that had lasted for generations. The peace pipe was not a symbol. It was a binding contract written in ash and air. The smoke was the witness, the judge, and the seal. There was a profound innocence in this relationship, a purity that is difficult for the modern mind to grasp. The plant was dangerous, yes, but it was not yet a commodity. It had not yet been weighed, taxed, and packaged. It had not yet been enslaved by the plantation system or manipulated by chemistry. It was a free agent, a wild spirit of the Americas that served as a mediator between the visible and the invisible. The indigenous people understood the duality of the plant, that it could heal and it could kill, and they approached it with the trembling, awe one reserves for a deity. As the embers of the shamaness fire fade into the dawn, we see the smoke drifting up through the smoke hole of the lodge, disappearing into the vast, indifferent sky. It carries with it the prayers of a people who lived in a rhythmic harmony with the land, unaware that the white sails were already gathering on the eastern horizon. They could not know that this sacred leaf, this green gold, would soon be stripped of its divinity. They could not foresee that the smoke, which once carried prayers to God, would one day become the smog of industry, fueling an empire of commerce and cancer that would define the modern age. The calumet rests on the earth, cool to the touch, waiting for a future that would change the meaning of the smoke forever. The horizon of history is rarely broken by a single wave, but on October 12, 1492, a cataclysm arrived in the form of 3 small wooden ships. We drift now to the white, blinding sands of San Salvador, where the old world collided violently with the new. Christopher Columbus, wary from the endless expanse of the Atlantic and driven by a hunger for the riches of the Orient, stood upon the beach. The air was thick with the scent of tropical flowers and the salt of a strange sea. The indigenous Taino people, greeting these bearded visitors with a mixture of awe and hospitality, offered gifts of friendship. They brought wooden spears, balls of cotton thread, and vibrant parrots. But among these treasures, they offered something else: dried, pungent leaves, bound together and radiating a strange, musky aroma. To the Genoese captain, whose mind was a ledger of gold, spices, and silk, these withered leaves appeared utterly worthless. He held the brown gold of the Americas in his hand, sniffed it with disdain, and tossed it aside. Watch as the dried foliage hits the turquoise water, bobbing on the surf, drifting away on the tide. It is one of history's great ironies that the man who came seeking wealth threw away a commodity that would one day rival the value of the gold he so desperately coveted. He saw only dead leaves. He did not see the seeds of a global empire. But curiosity is a force stronger than greed. While Columbus looked to the horizon, his men looked to the land. 2 of his crewmen, Rodrigo de Jerez and Luis de Torres, were sent into the verdant interior of Cuba to scout for the Great Gan of China. Instead of a golden city, they found a practice that defied their medieval understanding. They observed the natives holding rolls of dried leaves, lit at one end, drinking smoke from the burning embers. It was a ritual of casual intimacy. The natives called the roll tobacco. Jiras, a man of rough curiosity, was mesmerized. He watched the smoke enter the mouth and vanish into the lungs, only to reemerge as a gray cloud. He took the roll in his own hand. Picture the moment. The first European to inhale the breath of the New World. The ember glows orange against the jungle twilight. He draws the smoke in. He coughs, his lungs protesting the intrusion. But then, the chemistry takes hold. A wave of dizziness is followed by a sudden, sharp clarity. The fatigue of the voyage lifts. The hunger in his belly subsides. He is overcome by a strange, dizzying comfort. A sensation of well-being that seems to hum in his blood. In that single inhalation, the barrier between the continents was breached not by a sword, but by a molecule. When the ships turned back toward Spain, Jerez did not leave the habit behind. He carried the dried leaves with him, a secret comfort for the long, terrifying nights at sea. But the Spain he returned to was not the wild, permissive jungle of the Caribbean. It was a land shadowed by the cross and the sword, a place where the medieval mind still held sway, perceiving the supernatural in every shadow. Picture the scene in the bustling port town of Ayamonte, or perhaps the winding streets of Seville. Jerez, fresh from the edge of the world, sits in a tavern or stands in his doorway. He lights the tight roll of leaves. He inhales. As he exhales, thick plumes of gray smoke curl from his nose and mouth, wreathing his head in a sulfurous fog. To the simple villagers passing by, this was not a curious habit. It was a vision of damnation. In their theology, only the devil breathed smoke. Smoke belonged to the fires of hell. It was the exhaust of a soul burning from the inside out. Panic spread through the streets. They pointed trembling fingers at the human chimney, the man who had surely sold his soul in the heathen lands across the sea. The Holy Office of the Inquisition, the guardians of spiritual purity, acted swiftly. Jerez was seized. He was thrown into a dungeon, the heavy iron door slamming shut on the first smoker of Europe. He was accused of witchcraft, of being possessed by a demon that allowed him to exhale the fumes of the inferno. For years, Rodrigo de Jerez rotted in the darkness, a prisoner of his own discovery, suffering for a sin that was merely a botanical habit. Yet, history has a way of mocking iron bars. While Jerez languished in his cell, the very habit for which he was imprisoned began to seep through the walls. The sailors who had traveled with him, the merchants who smelled the profit in the leaves, and the aristocrats who sought the exotic thrill of the New World all began to light up. The sensation of nicotine, the sudden alertness it provided, the way it suppressed the gnawing hunger of the poor and calmed the nerves of the rich, was too seductive to be stopped by superstition. The biology of the plant was stronger than the theology of the church. It is a silent, creeping conquest. By the time Jerez was finally released, 7 long years later, he stepped out of the darkness of the prison and into the blinding sun of a new era. He must have stood there, blinking, expecting to be shunned. Instead, he would have smelled a familiar scent on the breeze. He would have seen men on the docks, in the plazas, and perhaps even the jailers themselves, holding pipes and cigars, exhaling the blue-gray clouds of the Americas. The devil's weed had taken root in the soil of Europe. The prisoner was free, but the world had entered a new captivity. The smoke that Columbus had tossed upon the waves now swirled through the courts and the alleys of Spain, a silent signal that the colonization of the old world by the new had begun, not with armies, but with a simple, addictive leaf. The wind shifts once again, carrying us away from the humid jungles of the Caribbean and the dank stone cells of the Spanish Inquisition. We travel northward, crossing the Pyrenees to arrive in the velvet-draped, perfume-scented courts of 16th century France. Here, the narrative of the plant undergoes a profound transmutation. It sheds its savage reputation, washing away the stigma of the devil's weed, and dons the respectable robes of high medicine. The leaf that was once the tool of the naked shaman now finds itself in the gloved hand of the most powerful woman in Europe. It is a lesson in the adaptability of the botanical world. To survive and conquer, the plant must mirror the desires of those who hold it. In Spain, it was a vice. In France, it would become a cure. The catalyst for this transformation was a man named Jean-Nicot de Villemain. In 1559, Nicot was sent to Lisbon as the French ambassador to Portugal. Lisbon at this time was the warehouse of the world, a glittering port where ships returned laden with the exotic spoils of the Age of Discovery. It was here, in the royal gardens, or perhaps in the study of a learned humanist, that Nicot encountered the strange plant from the Americas. He did not see it as a recreational diversion. He was a man of letters and science, and he observed the plant through the lens of the apothecary. He watched as Portuguese physicians applied the crushed leaves to cancerous ulcers and festering wounds, noting with astonishment how the flesh seemed to knit itself back together. He saw it cure skin diseases and ringworm. To Nicot, this was not a source of smoke. It was a panacea, a universal remedy sent by God to heal the afflictions of the flesh. But the true destiny of the plant lay in Paris, within the troubled skull of Catherine de' Medici. The Queen Mother of France was a woman of formidable intellect and ruthless power, the de facto ruler of the realm during the reigns of her 3 sons. Yet, this woman, who could command armies and orchestrate political massacres, was brought low by a simple biological flaw. She suffered from crippling, blinding migraines. History whispers of her agony days spent in darkened rooms, the curtains drawn tight against the sun, her head throbbing with a pain that felt like a nail being driven into the temple. The physicians of the court, with their leeches and their humors, stood helpless before her suffering. She was the most powerful woman in Christendom, yet she was a prisoner of her own pain. Word of the Queen's affliction reached Nicot in Lisbon. Sensing an opportunity to serve his monarch and perhaps advance his own standing, he prepared a package. He did not send the rough, rolled cigars of the sailors. He took the dried leaves of the tobacco plant and pulverized them, grinding them into a fine, fragrant dust. He sent this powder to the lover with specific instructions. The Queen was not to burn the herb, but to inhale it. She was to draw the dust into her nose. Visualize the moment in the royal chambers. The air is heavy with the scent of lavender and old tapestries. Catherine, pale and wary, sits before her vanity. She opens the small container sent by her ambassador. She takes a pinch of the brown dust between her thumb and forefinger, a gesture that would soon be copied by every courtier in Europe. She raises it to her nostril and inhales sharply. The reaction is immediate. The foreign particles irritate the nasal membrane. triggering a violent, convulsive sneeze. In the medical thinking of the time, this sneeze was miraculous. It was the physical expulsion of the bad humors and the excess mucus that caused the pain. But beneath the sneeze, a more potent chemistry was at work. The nicotine, absorbed instantly through the thin mucous membranes of the nose, rushed to the brain. It acted as a vasoconstrictor, tightening the blood vessels and relieving the pressure that caused the migraine. Simultaneously, it released a flood of dopamine and acetylcholine. The pain vanished, replaced by a sudden, crystalline clarity. The demon in the skull had been exorcised by the dust of the Americas. Overnight, the status of the plant changed forever. If the queen used it, it was no longer a heathen vice. It was a royal necessity. Tobacco was christened the *Herbae I la Reine * the Queen's Herb, or the *Herbae Medici. It became the height of fashion. The practice of smoking was considered vulgar, fit only for sailors and savages. But the practice of snuffing became the hallmark of the aristocracy. The plant moved from the clay pipe to the jeweled box. To be a member of the French court, one had to carry a snuff box, an exquisite object crafted from gold, silver, porcelain, or tortoise shell, often encrusted with diamonds and painted with miniature scenes of pastoral beauty. The act of taking tobacco became a performance, a punctuation mark in the conversation of the elite. There was a specific etiquette to the ritual: the tapping of the box, the opening of the lid, the elegant pinch, the inhale, and the flourish of the lace handkerchief to catch the sneeze. Dukes, cardinals, and princes walked the halls of Versailles with their noses dusted in brown powder, their brains humming with the quiet stimulation of the leaf. Jean Nicot's role in this botanical conquest was immortalized by the Swedish taxonomist Carl Linnaeus, who named the genus of the plant Nicotiana * in his honor. And when the active alkaloid was finally isolated centuries later, it was named nicotine. It is a strange legacy for a diplomat to have one's name forever attached to the most addictive substance on earth. Nicot died believing he had gifted humanity a miracle cure, a medicine that could heal ulcers and headaches. He did not know that he had actually delivered a Trojan horse. The plant had successfully seduced the aristocracy, climbing the social ladder from the bottom to the very top. It had moved from the shaman's pouch to the queen's handkerchief, hiding its claws beneath a veneer of royal approval. The addiction was no less potent in the palace than it was in the village. But it was now protected by wealth and prestige. The queen's powder began to trickle down from the court to the bourgeoisie, and then to the common man, spreading across Europe like a fine, invisible dust. The era of the pipe was temporarily eclipsed by the era of the nose. But the hunger remained the same, a silent, creeping dependency that was slowly weaving itself into the daily rhythm of Western civilization. The plant had conquered the New World, and now, dressed in silk and gold, it had conquered the Old. The wind carries us back across the heaving gray Atlantic, leaving the velvet parlors of Paris far behind, to the swampy, fever-ridden banks of the James River. We arrive in the New World. But this is not the paradise of the shaman or the untouched wilderness of the ancients. This is Jamestown, Virginia, in the year 1612. The air hangs heavy with the humidity of the marshes and the metallic scent of desperation. The English experiment is failing. The settlers, men of soft hands and high hopes, had come seeking the glittering mountains of gold promised by the Spanish legends. Instead, they found only brackish water, hostile arrows, and a damp heat that bred mosquitoes and madness. The starving time has left the colony a graveyard of skeletal ambitions. The dream of a new Eden is sinking into the mud. Into this theater of despair steps a man of quiet determination, a figure who would single-handedly alter the trajectory of the Western Hemisphere. John Rolfe. Rolfe looks at the starving colony and realizes that survival will not come from the mine, but from the soil. He knows that the native tobacco, Nicotiana rustica*, which the locals smoke with such reverence, is too harsh and biting for the delicate English palate. It tastes of brimstone and wild earth. If Virginia is to survive, it must produce something that London craves. Rolfe turns his gaze south, to the Spanish colonies of the Caribbean, where a different species, Nicotiana tabacum*, grows broad and sweet under the tropical sun. But the Spanish Empire guards its brown gold with the jealousy of a dragon. The export of tobacco seeds is a crime punishable by death. Rolfe, driven by the existential threat facing his people, commits an act of botanical espionage. He secures the forbidden seeds, perhaps hidden in the lining of a coat or the false bottom of a trunk, and smuggles them into Virginia. He plants them in the rich, alluvial soil along the river banks. He watches. He waits, and he prays, and the earth responds. The alien seeds take root in the Virginian loam, drinking in the rain and the sun, erupting into tall, proud stalks with leaves as large as shields. When the leaves are harvested and cured, turning from green to a rich golden brown, Rolfe packs a clay pipe and lights it. The smoke is mild, fragrant, and intoxicatingly smooth. It lacks the bite of the frost. It carries the kiss of the sun. He ships a sample to England, and the reaction is immediate and overwhelming. London falls in love. The fog of the Thames is soon mingled with the sweet smoke of Virginia. The demand creates a mania. Men and women, rich and poor, clamor for the sought weed. The colony is saved. There is no gold in the ground, but there is gold growing out of it. Jamestown transforms from a dying outpost into a boom town, a place where the streets are literally paved with tobacco stalks. But the earth does not give its gifts for free, and the tobacco plant is a demanding master. It is a hungry crop, a botanical vampire that devours the nitrogen and potassium from the soil with a voracious appetite. After only a few seasons, the land is exhausted, turned to dust. This biological hunger forces the settlers to expand, pushing ever outward, cutting down the ancient forests to feed the addiction of the old world. And as the fields grow, so does the demand for labor. Tobacco farming is an art of suffering. It requires intense, back-breaking attention. The seedlings must be transplanted by hand. The weeds must be hoed. The plants must be topped and suckered to concentrate the energy in the leaves. And finally, the harvest must be cut and cured in the stifling heat of the barns. To feed the European addiction, the settlers first turned to the poor of England. Indentured servants. Desperate souls trading years of their lives for a passage across the ocean. Arrive by the thousands. They labor in the fields, their sweat watering the crop, dreaming of a freedom that many will not live to see. But the appetite of the plant is insatiable, and the contract of the indenture eventually expires. The planters, driven by the cold logic of profit, look for a labor force that never leaves, a workforce that can be owned as completely as the land itself. And so, the shadow lengthens across the Atlantic. In 1619, a ship named the White Lion drops anchor at Point Comfort, carrying a cargo of 20-odd Africans. This is the moment the trap snaps shut. The economy of the American South begins to build itself on the back of the tobacco leaf, cemented by the institution of chattel slavery, the plant that was once a vehicle for peace, a sacred bridge between the warrior and the Great Spirit, has become the architect of a system of bondage that will scar a nation for centuries. Visualize the vast plantations of the Tidewater, stretching to the horizon. The heat is shimmering and absolute. In the rows of green, human figures move in a rhythm of forced labor, their bodies bending and breaking to harvest the pleasure of distant strangers. Every hogshead of tobacco rolled onto a ship bound for London is paid for in human freedom. The smoke that rises from the pipes of the English gentlemen in their coffee houses is thick with the invisible ghosts of the Middle Passage. The brown gold has saved the colony, yes, but it has purchased its survival with a currency of sorrow. The biography of the plant has shifted irrevocably. It is no longer the wild herb of the forest, but the industrial engine of an empire. A beautiful, golden leaf casting a shadow that will eventually darken the soul of the entire continent. The wind that filled the sails of the European galleons did not stop at the Atlantic coast. It continued eastward, carrying the invisible spores of habit across the Mediterranean to the very gates of the Orient. By the early 17th century, the brown gold of Virginia and the Caribbean had found its way into the hands of Dutch merchants, the great maritime couriers of the age. These traders brought the leaf to the Golden Horn, to the bustling, spice-scented streets of Constantinople. Here, in the beating heart of the Ottoman Empire, the plant underwent yet another metamorphosis. It was not chewed like the Indian leaf, nor sniffed like the French powder, nor burned in the simple clay bowls of the English. The East demanded refinement. It demanded that the savage heat of the American weed be tamed, cooled, and civilized. And so, the leaf found a new and elegant vessel, the nargila the water pipe. To understand the allure of the nargila or the hookah, as it is known in the West, one must visualize the physics of the device. It is an instrument of transformation. The harsh, biting smoke of the dried tobacco is drawn down a stem and forced underwater. In this bubbling passage, a chemical baptism occurs. The water strips away the heat and the heaviest particulates, cooling the vapor until it is as smooth as silk. It is then drawn through a long, serpentine hose to the lips of the smoker. The act is not a quick injection of nicotine. It is a rhythmic, hydraulic cycle. The bubbling sound of the water pipe became the heartbeat of the Ottoman social life, a soothing percussion that echoed against the tiled walls of the city. The stage for this new habit was the coffee house, or *kahvehane*. These were not merely places to drink the dark, bitter brew of Yemen. They were the schools of the wise, the intellectual living rooms of the empire. In the dim, lantern-lit corners of 17th century Istanbul, men would sit for hours on plush cushions, the air thick with the aromas of charcoal, roasting beans, and tobacco. Here, poets recited their verses, merchants struck deals, and philosophers debated the nature of the soul, all punctuated by the passing of the hose and the exhale of perfumed clouds. The tobacco, often mixed with molasses, honey, or dried fruit to create ****, became the incense of conversation, a way to pause time in a rapidly expanding world. But where there is gathering, there is gossip. And where there is gossip, there is fear in the hearts of kings. Enter Sultan Murad, a ruler whose name is etched in history with the twin chisels of cruelty and paranoia. Murad looked upon the coffee houses not as centers of culture, but as breeding grounds for sedition. He saw men huddled in the smoke, whispering, and he imagined plots against his throne. He feared the spark of the pipe would ignite the fires of rebellion. His paranoia was fueled by the Great Fire of 1633, which devastated a third of Istanbul, a catastrophe blamed on a careless smoker. Seizing this pretext, Murad issued a decree that struck at the very lungs of his people. He banned tobacco. It was not a fine or a tax. It was a prohibition written in blood. The penalty for smoking was death. To enforce his will, the Sultan transformed into a creature of the night. Legends tell of Murad prowling the winding streets of Istanbul in disguise, dressed as a commoner or a merchant, a heavy scimitar hidden beneath his cloak. He would wander into the clandestine coffee houses that dared to remain open, sniffing the air for the forbidden scent. If he found a man smoking, the disguise was dropped, and the execution was immediate. The streets ran red. Historians estimate that tens of thousands of subjects were put to the sword or hanged during his reign, their bodies left in the streets as grim warnings to those who would dare to light the leaf. Imagine the psychological terror of this era. To smoke a pipe was to gamble with one's life. Yet, here we witness the terrifying, unconquerable power of the addiction. The leaf was more powerful than the sword. Despite the beheadings, despite the bodies swinging from the city gates, the people did not stop. The soldiers in the Sultan's own army dug holes in the ground to hide their pipes, smoking the devil's weed in the trenches. The scholars smoked in the dark cellars of their libraries. The drive for the nicotine, for that moment of peace and clarity amidst the terror, overrode the primal instinct for survival. The ban created a forbidden allure, turning the act of smoking into a gesture of silent defiance against tyranny. When Murad finally succumbed to cirrhosis, a victim of his own vice, alcohol, the ban died with him. His successors realized what kings and governments would learn time and again over the coming centuries. You cannot legislate an appetite out of existence. The coffee houses reopened. The bubbling of the nargila resumed. Louder than before, the East embraced tobacco completely, weaving it into the tapestry of daily life. It became a symbol of hospitality. To offer a guest a pipe was to offer them friendship and trust. The smoke drifted through the palaces of the pashas and the tents of the Bedouins, uniting the prince and the pauper in a shared haze. The plant had survived the wrath of a tyrant, proving that once takes root in the human psyche, it is harder to kill than any empire. The nargila remained, a glass monument to the victory of the leaf, cementing tobacco's status not just as a crop, but as a permanent, global companion to the human condition. The rhythmic breathing of the seasons, the slow cycle of the planting and the harvest, began to fade as the 19th century marched toward its iron conclusion. The pastoral silence of the Virginia fields was broken not by the call of the bird or the song of the worker, but by a new, terrifying sound, the clatter of gears, the screech of metal on metal, and the hiss of escaping steam. We stand now at the dawn of the Industrial Revolution, a moment where the alchemy of fire and water birthed a new age of speed. For centuries, the consumption of tobacco had been a ritual of patience. The pipe required packing, tamping, and lighting with a coal. The cigar was a work of art rolled by the calloused hands of a master *, torceder *. the snuff box was an accessory of leisure. Even the early cigarettes were rolled by hand, mostly by young women in dusty factories, their fingers stained brown, producing perhaps 3 or 4 tubes a minute. They were expensive novelties. The beggar's smoke or the dandy's affectation, a luxury of inefficiency. But destiny has a way of accelerating when steel meets ambition. In 1880, in the humid climate of Virginia, a young inventor named James Bonsack stared into the heart of this inefficiency and saw a mechanical solution. He was a man of the new age, possessed by the belief that there was no human motion that could not be replicated and improved by a machine. He spent his nights drafting blueprints and his days tinkering with brass and belts, attempting to create an automaton that could mimic the delicate roll of the human thumb. After months of failure and frustration, the beast finally awoke. Imagine the Bonsack machine as it first roared to life. It was a sprawling, complex leviathan of pulleys, hoppers, and circular blades, smelling of hot oil and pulverized leaf. It did not tire. It did not ask for wages. It did not rest. It took the shredded tobacco, dropped it onto a continuous strip of paper, rolled it, pasted it, and sliced it with a rhythmic violence that was hypnotic to watch. While a skilled human hand could roll perhaps 4 cigarettes a minute on a good day, the Bonsack machine spat out 200. It was a river of white cylinders, flowing at a speed that the world had never seen. In the span of a single hour, the scarcity of the past was obliterated, replaced by a terrifying abundance. Suddenly, the cigarette was no longer a luxury. It was a commodity as cheap as bread and as uniform as a bullet. This was the birth of the white cylinder, the standardized dose of nicotine that would define the 20th century. The individuality of the leaf, its terroir, its specific cure was crushed under the weight of consistency. Every cigarette was exactly like the last, a soldier in an infinite army of paper and smoke. And just as the machine birthed the product, another invention arrived to birth the habit, the safety match. Before this moment, carrying fire was a logistical challenge. But with the advent of the friction match, fire became portable, instant, and democratic. A man could now strike a light against a boot heel or a brick wall, ignite his machine-made cigarette, and inhale the drug in the span of seconds. The slow, meditative ritual of the pipe, which required a chair and a fireplace, was replaced by the quick, nervous hit of the cigarette. It was a change that mirrored the shifting rhythm of human existence. The world was moving from the agrarian cycle of the sun to the frantic, ticking time of the factory clock. The city was rising. London, New York, Paris, places of concrete and noise, where men rushed to catch trams and meet deadlines. The cigarette was the perfect companion for this new, breathless pace. It was disposable, identical, and infinitely repeatable. It fit into the 10-minute break of the assembly line worker. It fit into the trench coat of the soldier waiting for the whistle. It fit into the nervous fingers of the stockbroker watching the ticker tape. It was the punctuation mark of the modern sentence, a brief pause in the relentless forward motion of the industrial age. The smoke no longer drifted lazily to the ceiling of a coffee house. It was sucked deep into the lungs on a street corner, a quick infusion of chemical focus to survive the chaos of the metropolis. The Bonsack machine did not just manufacture a product, it manufactured a new type of addict. In the economic laws of the past, demand created supply. But here, the equation was inverted. The machine created such a gargantuan surplus, millions upon millions of cigarettes piling up in warehouses, that the supply demanded a user. The tobacco barons, led by men like James Duke, who saw the potential of Bonsack's beast, unleashed a flood of advertising to ensure that the river of paper and tobacco found a destination in the human body. They lowered the price until it was cheaper to smoke than to eat. They gave them away to immigrants, to soldiers, to children. As the sun sets on the 19th century, we see the silhouette of the modern smoker emerging from the smog. He is no longer the shaman communing with the Great Spirit, nor the aristocrat with his jeweled snuff box. He is a man standing under a gaslight, collar turned up against the cold, lighting a white tube with a flick of his wrist. He inhales the smoke of the machine, feeding an addiction that has been engineered for maximum efficiency. The white cylinder had conquered the world not through quality, but through the sheer, brute force of volume. The gears of the Bonsack machine continued to turn, spinning a web of smoke that would encircle the globe, binding humanity to a habit that was now as mechanical and as merciless as the age that birthed it. The era of the leaf was ending. The era of the tube had begun. The gears of the Bonsack machine had conquered the physical world, flooding the cities with an endless river of white cylinders. But the tobacco empire faced a barrier that no machine could break. As the roaring 20s dawned, bringing with them the frantic energy of jazz, short skirts, and Art Deco skylines, the captains of the industry looked at their ledgers and saw a problem. They had captured the lungs of nearly every man in America, but half the population remained stubbornly out of reach. For a woman to smoke in public was not merely a breach of etiquette. It was a moral transgression, a signal of loose virtue associated with prostitutes and the fallen. The cigarette was a phallic totem of male power, and society guarded it jealously. The market had hit a green ceiling. To break it, the American Tobacco Company did not hire a salesman. They hired a puppet master. Enter Edward Bernays. He was a man small in stature but colossal in influence, a figure who operated in the invisible currents of the human mind. As the double nephew of Sigmund Freud, Bernays had inherited a dark and powerful legacy. While his uncle mapped the subconscious to heal it, Bernays sought to map it to exploit it. He is the father of public relations, a sanitized term for the industrial-scale manipulation of public opinion. When George Washington Hill, the brash president of the American Tobacco Company, approached him with the command to open up the female market, Bernays did not look at the cigarette as a product. He looked at it as a symbol. He consulted with the psychoanalyst A.A. Brill, asking a question that cut to the core of the taboo. What does the cigarette represent to the female mind? Brill's answer was strictly Freudian. He suggested that for women, the cigarette was a symbol of the penis, of male power and prerogative. If Bernays wanted women to smoke, he had to reframe the act. He had to turn the cigarette from a symbol of male dominance into a symbol of female challenge. He had to make the act of smoking a declaration of independence. The stage for this psychological coup was set with the precision of a military operation. Bernays chose the 1929 Easter Parade in New York City, a grand procession of piety and fashion where the eyes of the world would be fixed on Fifth Avenue. He did not hire rough actresses. He hired debutantes, young women from high society whose reputations were unimpeachable. He instructed them to hide cigarettes in their garters and dresses. He orchestrated the timing, the location, and the angle, but his masterstroke was the press. He tipped off the photographers and the reporters, telling them that a group of suffragettes was planning a protest, a demonstration of rights they called torches of freedom. Picture the scene on that crisp spring Sunday. The avenue is a canyon of stone and glass, filled with the ringing of church bells and the murmur of the crowd. The women, dressed in their Sunday best, step out from the throng at a prearranged signal. They stop, they reach into their clothes, they produce the white cylinders, and then, in a gesture that would shatter the cultural glass ceiling, they strike their matches. The flame touches the tobacco, the smoke rises. The photographers, positioned by Bernays, capture the moment in stark black and white. These were not women lurking in a speakeasy. These were American daughters marching in the daylight, holding fire in their hands. The images flashed across the globe with the speed of a telegram. The headlines the next day did not scream of scandal. They screamed of liberation. Women smoke cigarettes as torches of freedom, the papers declared, using the very phrase Bernays had placed in their mouths. It was a masterclass in alchemy. In a single afternoon, Bernays had transmuted a tube of addictive leaves into a wand of emancipation. He had linked the product to a deep, unfulfilled human desire. The cigarette was no longer a dirty habit. It was a badge of the modern, independent woman. It was a way to break the chains of patriarchy with a puff of smoke. To smoke was to be free, to be equal, to be powerful. The impact was seismic. The taboo evaporated almost overnight. Women began to smoke in theaters, in restaurants, and on the street. The American Tobacco Company saw their market double, then triple. But the tragedy of this coup lay in its cynicism. The freedom Bernays sold was an illusion. He had hijacked the feminist movement, co-opting the genuine struggle for voting rights and equality to sell a chemical dependency. He had enslaved a generation of women to a habit that would blacken their lungs and shorten their lives, all while telling them they were breaking free. As the smoke cleared from Fifth Avenue, a new reality settled over the West. The cigarette had been fully integrated into the psychological architecture of the self. It was no longer just a delivery system for nicotine. It was a prop for the ego. Bernays had proven that if you can understand the subconscious fears and desires of the herd, you can lead them anywhere, even into the embrace of a carcinogen. The torch of freedom burned brightly, illuminating a path not to liberty, but to the cancer wards of the future, a testament to the terrifying power of the story over the truth. The sky over Europe turns the color of bruised iron as the world plunges once more into the abyss. The year is 1939, and the machinery of death, dormant for a generation, roars back to life with a ferocity that shakes the foundations of the earth. But amidst the thunder of the artillery and the scream of the Stuka dive bombers, a smaller, quieter mechanism is at work. It is not made of steel, but of paper and dried leaf, as the nations of the world mobilize their young men for the slaughter. The tobacco industry mobilizes alongside them, ensuring that the cigarette goes to the front lines not as a contraband luxury, but as a strategic necessity. To understand the scale of this integration, we must look to the desperate cables sent from the muddy trenches of the First World War. Lessons that were codified by the time of the Second. General John J. Pershing, the commander of the American Expeditionary Forces, had famously wired Washington with a plea that echoed through the decades. You ask me what we need to win this war. I answer tobacco as much as bullets. The logic was cold and undeniable. A soldier who is cold, hungry, and terrified is a liability. A soldier who is smoking is, for a fleeting moment, distracted from the horror. The cigarette became the psychological anchor of the infantryman, the only warm thing in a cold foxhole, the only calm breath in a world choking on mustard gas and cordite. By the 1940s, this philosophy had become official policy. The cigarette was conscripted. It was included in the C rations and K rations, nestled between the tin of Spam and the packet of biscuits. It was distributed by the carton, free of charge, a gift from the government to the boys overseas. Picture a 19-year-old G shivering in the snow of the Ardennes forest during the Battle of the Bulge. The trees are shattering around him. The ground is frozen rock hard. He reaches into his webbing and pulls out a pack of Lucky Strikes or Camels. His hands, numb and trembling, strike a match. As the flame touches the tobacco, a small, glowing circle of orange illuminates his face. He inhales. The smoke hits his lungs harsh, warm, and familiar. For 10 minutes, the war recedes. The hunger in his belly, gnawing at him for days, is suppressed by the chemical appetite of the nicotine. The shaking in his hands steadies. He is not in Belgium. He is back on a front porch in Ohio. This was the Brotherhood of Ash. The cigarette became the universal currency of the war. More valuable than money, more trusted than officers. It was the language of camaraderie spoken in every theater of conflict. In the steaming jungles of Guadalcanal, Marines shared smokes to keep the mosquitoes and the fear at bay. On the flight decks of aircraft carriers in the Pacific, pilots chain smoked while waiting for the order to scramble. Even across enemy lines, the ritual held. Stories abound of American and German soldiers, during brief ceasefires or moments of capture, sharing a cigarette. It was a recognition of shared humanity in an inhuman world. A silent admission that they were all just men trapped in a machine they could not control, united by the fragile glowing ember between their fingers. The tobacco companies, demonstrating a patriotic ruthlessness, branded the war as their own. They sent millions of packs to the front with slogans like "Lucky Strike Green has gone to war." They ensured that when a soldier reached for comfort, he reached for their brand. It was the ultimate marketing campaign, paid for in blood. By hooking the soldiers, they were securing the loyalty of an entire generation. The addiction was forged in the fire of combat, creating a neurological bond between the relief of survival and the taste of tobacco. When the guns finally fell silent in 1945 and the troop ships navigated the Atlantic back home, the gist did not leave the habit in the ruins of Berlin or Tokyo. They brought it with them, carrying it like a stowaway in their lungs. The cigarette was woven into the fabric of the post-war victory. It became the scent of the American century. Walk into any home in the 1950s, and the air would be thick with the blue-gray haze of the return. The smell of tobacco became the smell of the father, the smell of the veteran, the smell of stability and hard-won peace. It was no longer just a product to be bought at the corner store. It was a medal of survival, pinned to the chest of the greatest generation. To smoke was to show that you had been there, that you had endured the unendurable. The flick of the Zippo lighter, that metallic asterisk clink asterisk, followed by the flame, became the soundtrack of the new prosperity. The industry had succeeded beyond its wildest dreams. They had not just sold a commodity, they had fused it with the concept of duty, honor, and masculinity. The soldier had won the war against fascism, but he had lost the war against the leaf, bringing the soldier's ration home to his wife and children, unwittingly planting the seeds of a new, slower tragedy that would unfold in the oncology wards of the future. The Brotherhood of Ash remained, a silent legion exhaling their memories into the suburban air. The guns of the Second World War had fallen silent, replaced by the low, humming ambition of the post-war boom. As the 1950s dawned, a new temple of worship rose in the cultural landscape of the West. The cinema. In the darkness of the theater, illuminated by the flickering beam of the projector, the cigarette ceased to be a mere commodity of soldiers and factory workers. It was transfigured into the ultimate prop of the silver screen, a wand of white paper and tobacco that possessed the power to define the very essence of cool. It was the brush with which the gods of Hollywood painted emotion, a tool of such visual utility that it became inseparable from the art of storytelling itself. To understand the grip of the cigarette in this era, one must visualize the texture of black and white film. In a world without color, light and shadow chiaroscuro were everything. Smoke was the physical manifestation of atmosphere. It gave volume to the light, catching the beams of the studio lamps and swirling them into a noir texture that softened the harsh edges of reality. Watch Humphrey Bogart in Casablanca sitting in the shadows of Rick's Café American. The smoke does not just drift. It coils around the brim of his fedora like a living thing, a visual metaphor for the moral ambiguity of a world at war. It shields his eyes, creating a veil of mystery that separates the stoic hero from the chaos around him. In his hands, the cigarette is not a habit, it is armor. It is the punctuation mark of the cynic, the thinking man's pause before delivering a line that will break a heart. But the smoke was not reserved for the wary hero. It was the weapon of the seductress. In an era where the censors strictly regulated the depiction of intimacy, the cigarette became a proxy for sex. The sharing of a light was a moment of supreme intimacy, a spark jumping between two souls. The femme fatale, draped in silk and shadow, would exhale a long, thin plume of gray mist, signaling danger and desire in equal measure. Actresses like Lauren Bacall and Marlene Dietrich wielded the cigarette with a lethal elegance, turning the inhalation of toxins into a ballad of the fingers and lips. It signified a woman who was emancipated, dangerous, and in control of her own pleasure. The audience, sitting in the dark, absorbed this language unconsciously. To smoke was to be sophisticated, to exhale was to be desirable. As the decade matured, the torch passed from the noir cynic to the teenage rebel, a young James Dean, vibrating with the restless energy of a new generation. Slouched on the screen with a cigarette hanging loosely from his lip, he did not smoke with the precision of the aristocrat. He smoked with the defiance of the outcast. The white cylinder became the symbol of the rebel without a cause, a middle finger raised against the suffocating conformity of the suburban age. Suddenly, a million teenagers in leather jackets mimicked the pose, believing that if they could master the way he held the tobacco, they could inherit his soul. The industry had successfully captured the youth, not by selling the taste, but by selling the attitude. Behind this celluloid dream stood the sorcerers of Madison Avenue, the advertising agencies of the 1950s. Flush with the profits of the war, pumped billions into reinforcing these cinematic myths. They understood that the public was beginning to hear whispers of a dark truth. The smoker's cough was becoming a national rattle. To combat this, they constructed a beautiful, fortress-like lie. They enlisted the authority of science to sell the poison. Full-page advertisements appeared in magazines featuring men in white coats, stethoscopes around their necks, proclaiming that more doctors smoke Camels than any other cigarette. They toted gentle brands that protected the T-zone throat and taste. It was a campaign of breathtaking audacity, using the symbols of health to sell the agents of death. And when the medical veneer began to crack, they turned to the ultimate American myth, the cowboy. In one of the most successful rebranding campaigns in history, the Philip Morris Company took Marlboro, originally a women's cigarette with a red tip to hide lipstick stains, and moved it to the rugged terrain of the West. They created the Marlboro Man. Picture the imagery: the vast, open sky of Montana, the wild horses, the rugged individualist with a Stetson hat and a weathered face. He was the antithesis of the office clerk trapped in a cubicle. He was freedom, vitality, and masculine strength. The music of the commercials soared, creating a Pavlovian link between the sight of the red pack and the feeling of the open range. The irony of this imagery is a tragedy that rivals any Greek play. The Marlboro Man was an icon of health. Yet the actors who portrayed him, men like Wayne McLaren and David McLean, would eventually succumb to the ravages of lung cancer. The rugged breath of the cowboy was wheezing through an oxygen tank in the end. But in the golden haze of the 1950s, this future was invisible. The world was constructed of smoke and mirrors, a cinematic hallucination where the hero never coughed, the beauty never wrinkled, and the cigarette was the eternal companion to the best moments of life. The audience watched the screen, mesmerized by the swirling gray ribbons, unaware that the biological reality taking place within their own cells was a horror story writing itself in slow motion. The Hollywood haze was complete, a blinding fog that allowed the industry to reap a harvest of gold while the seeds of a pandemic took root in the dark. The golden haze of Hollywood and the romantic smoke of the battlefield could not hide the truth forever. Physics and biology are relentless auditors. Eventually, the books must be balanced. While the Marlboro Man rode across the billboards of the American West, projecting an image of rugged immortality, a darker, colder reality was being distilled in the sterile silence of a laboratory. We must travel now to the year 1953, to the Sloan Kettering Institute in New York City. The air here does not smell of sagebrush or perfume. It smells of antiseptic, cedar shavings, and the acrid, biting stench of concentrated residue. It is here that the great denial began to unravel, not with a shout, but with the quiet, scratching sounds of a cage. Enter Jur, Ernst Winder and Jur of Arts Graham. They were men of science, driven by a suspicion that the rising tide of lung cancer, a disease that had been exceedingly rare at the turn of the century, was not a random genetic drift, but a man-made plague. They designed an experiment that was brutal in its simplicity. They built a machine to smoke cigarettes, hundreds of them, inhaling the fumes not into a pair of lungs, but into a condenser. They captured the smoke and chilled it, forcing the gray ghost to manifest as a physical substance. What remained was not the romantic breath of the gods, but a thick, viscous sludge. It was tar, black, sticky, and full. It was the concentrated essence of the leaf after the fire had passed through it. For months, the doctors performed a grim ritual. They took this tar and painted it onto the shaved backs of white mice. They watched. They waited. The industry had long claimed that the smoke was harmless, a mere irritant like dust on a road. But biology does not lie. As the weeks turned into months, the skin of the creatures began to change. It thickened. It inflamed. And finally, It erupted. Malignant tumors, ugly and aggressive, bloomed on the flesh of the mice. The link was no longer theoretical. It was undeniable. The tar was carcinogenic. The cancer stick was not a slang term used by rebellious teenagers. It was a medical reality. Winder and Graham had proven that the very substance coating the lungs of half the adult population was a seedbed for death. The reaction to this discovery was a study in duality. The scientific community was electrified. But the captains of the tobacco industry were terrified. They saw the mouse and the tar not as a medical breakthrough, but as an existential threat to an empire worth billions. In December of 1953, the presidents of the major tobacco companies' men, who were usually bitter rivals, gathered in secret at the Plaza Hotel in New York. In that smoke-filled room, they forged a pact that would define the next half-century of public health. They knew they could not deny the science forever, so they decided to cloud it. They formed the Tobacco Industry Research Committee, a body designed with a name that implied curiosity, but whose purpose was obstruction. They hired a public relations firm to craft a strategy of psychological warfare. They realized that they did not need to prove cigarettes were safe. They only needed to prove that the case against them was not yet closed. They weaponized skepticism. In a now infamous internal memo, a tobacco executive wrote a sentence that stands as the epitaph for the era of corporate innocence. Doubt is our product. They flooded the media with questions. Asterisk, was it the tar? Or was it air pollution? Was it genetics? Was it the stress of modern life? Asterisk, by manufacturing a controversy where none existed, they bought themselves decades of profit. They turned the courtroom into a battlefield, fighting a war of attrition against the truth while the death toll quietly mounted in the oncology wards. But the truth is a persistent ghost, and it eventually found a voice that could not be silenced by a prayer campaign. On a cold Saturday morning, January 11th, 1964, the doors of a State Department auditorium in Washington, D.C. were locked. Inside, 200 reporters waited anxiously. They were handed a book titled simply *Smoking and Health. Report of the Advisory Committee to the Surgeon General of the Public Health Service *. Luther Terry, the Surgeon General, stood at the podium. He did not mince words. He did not offer the comforting ambiguity that the industry craved. The report fell like a hammer blow. The text was dry, scholarly, and absolutely terrifying. It connected smoking directly, causally, and undeniably to lung cancer and chronic bronchitis. It pointed the finger at the cigarette as the primary cause of the epidemic. The news broke over the weekend to minimize the crash of the stock market, but it shattered the psychological landscape of the nation. The public was stunned. The trusted companion, the torch of freedom, the soldier's comfort, the prop of the movie star, it was all revealed to be an assassin. This was the moment the golden haze evaporated. The smoker, who the day before had lit up with a sense of sophistication and belonging, now looked at the burning cylinder between their fingers with a new and dawning horror. They were not holding a wand of pleasure. They were holding a delivery system for tar. The report marked the end of the age of innocence and the beginning of the age of warning. The war of the lungs had officially moved from the laboratory to the living room. The illusion was broken, and though the industry would fight on for decades, pouring billions into the manufacture of doubt, they had lost the moral high ground. The mouse with the tumor on its back had cast a shadow longer than the skyscrapers of Madison Avenue, a shadow that stretched across the future. marking the cigarette not as a friend, but as a slow, patient, and lethal enemy. The wheel of history grinds slowly, but it grinds exceedingly fine. We have traveled from the sacred fires of the Andes and the smoke-filled lodges of the Huron to the velvet courts of France and the neon-lit billboards of Times Square. Now, the narrative arrives at a place devoid of romance. A room stripped of all poetry save for the stark, dramatic irony of the human lie. It is April 14th, 1994. The setting is the Henry A. Waxman hearing room in Washington. The air is cool, conditioned, and thick with the tension of a reckoning long overdue. On this day, the captains of the modern tobacco empire, the CEOs of the 7 largest tobacco companies in the world, stand shoulder to shoulder. They are men of immense wealth and power, the heirs to the legacy of John Rolfe and James Duke. They are dressed in the uniform of their station, dark, expensive suits, crisp white shirts, and silk ties. They raise their right hands. The cameras of the world are trained upon them, the shutters clicking like a firing squad. Under the penalty of perjury, they are asked a simple, scientific question about the nature of the product that built their fortunes. One by one, they lean into the microphones. Their voices are steady, practiced, and devoid of shame. I believe that nicotine is not addictive, declares William Campbell of Philip Morris. I believe that nicotine is not addictive, echoes James Johnston of R.J. Reynolds. The litany continues down the line, a chorus of denial that defies decades of internal research, medical consensus, and the lived experience of millions of struggling smokers. The press, watching this spectacle of coordinated deceit, would later dub them the 7 Dwarfs. They were titans of industry shrinking before the eyes of the public, small men casting long, dark shadows over the integrity of corporate America. It was a theater of the absurd, a final, desperate performance of the great denial. But even as they spoke, the curtain was already falling. The era of the secret was over. From the shadows of these very corporations emerged a new kind of hero. The whistleblower. Men like Jeffrey Wigand, a former vice president of research and development at Brown and Williamson, stepped forward from the darkness. Wigand was a man of science who had looked into the heart of the machine and could no longer bear the weight of what he saw. He carried with him not just his conscience, but the smoking gun, thousands of pages of internal documents, stamped confidential, that revealed the terrifying truth. These papers were the autopsy report of the industry as Sul. They revealed that the companies had known for decades, long before the Surgeon General's report, that their product was carcinogenic. More damningly, they revealed that the cigarette was not merely an agricultural product, but a sophisticated drug delivery device. The documents detailed how chemists had manipulated the FeV levels of the tobacco, using ammonia, a process known as free basing, to ensure that the nicotine hit the brain faster and harder. They had engineered the addiction with the precision of a watchmaker. They had studied the per-smoker, a cynical euphemism for children to understand how to hook the next generation. The revelation hit the public consciousness like a physical blow. The 7 Dwarfs had not just lied to Congress. They had lied to the world. The legal floodgates opened. The attorneys general of nearly every state in the Union filed suit, demanding restitution for the billions of dollars spent treating smoking-related illnesses. The result was the Master Settlement Agreement of 1998. the largest civil litigation settlement in human history. The industry was forced to pay hundreds of billions of dollars in perpetuity, a penalty for a century of deception. But the money was only part of the collapse. The cultural infrastructure of the cigarette began to dismantle. The billboards that had loomed over the highways for decades, promising flavor and freedom, were torn down, leaving empty steel frames against the sky. Joe Camel, the cartoon mascot who was as recognizable to 6-year-olds as Mickey Mouse, was retired in disgrace. The vending machines vanished from the lobbies. The smoke was cleared from the restaurants and the airplanes. The glamour that had been so carefully constructed by Hollywood and Madison Avenue was stripped away, layer by layer, until only the naked reality remained. The cigarette was no longer the torch of freedom or the soldier's comfort. It was revealed as a toxic artifact, a finely tuned instrument of mortality. The user was no longer the rugged cowboy or the sophisticated debutante. They were the patient in the oncology ward, fighting for breath. The 7 dwarfs had stood before the nation and tried to hold back the tide with a lie, but the truth, like the smoke they sold, has a way of escaping even the tightest container. The oath of perjury was the final gasp of the old order, a moment where the brown gold of Virginia lost its luster forever, revealing the leaden weight of the sorrow it had accumulated over 400 years of harvest. The wheel of time turns, grinding the centuries into dust, and we arrive, finally, at the precipice of the modern day. The landscape has shifted once again. The heavy, blue-gray haze that once hung over the boardrooms, the cinemas, and the dinner tables of the world has lifted. The ashtrays, those glass and ceramic altars to the leaf that once graced at every surface from the office desk to the airplane armrest, have vanished, swept away by the broom of public health and changing culture. The smoker, once the protagonist of the social scene, the cowboy, the starlet, the general, has been demoted to a figure on the periphery. We see them now through the windows of glass-walled towers, huddled in the rain outside the office building, standing in the cold alleyway, an exile from the indoors, clutching a glowing ember against the wind. They are the last holdouts of the Brotherhood of Ash, practicing a ritual that the world has decided to leave behind. But nature is nothing if not resilient, and the tobacco plant, Nicotiana**, is a master of adaptation. It has survived the extinction of the indigenous shaman, the fall of the French monarchy, and the wrath of the American legal system. It does not surrender. It shapeshifts. As the combustible market slowly chokes on its own smoke, a new phantom rises from the ashes. It is sleek, metallic, and silent. It is the electronic cigarette, the vape. This new vessel sheds the organic skin of the leaf entirely. There is no fire here, no ash, no tar to stain the lungs black. Instead, there is a battery, a heating coil, and a liquid suspension of pure, distilled nicotine. It offers a seductive new promise to a world obsessed with hygiene and longevity. The drug without the death, the ritual without the stench. It does not taste of the burning earth or the cured barn. It tastes of mango, crumb brulee, and cool mint. It is the white cylinder reimagined for the digital age, clean, rechargeable, and seemingly innocent. This transformation has seduced a new generation. Teenagers who would have recoiled at the harsh, biting smoke of an unfiltered Lucky Strike or a Camel are drawn to the sweet, invisible vapor of the Juul. The cloud chasers have replaced the pipe smokers. The cycle of addiction, which seemed to be breaking, has been soldered back together with circuitry and lithium. The delivery system has changed, but the passenger remains the same. The alkaloid that evolved in the Andes to stop insects from eating the leaves is now coursing through the veins of the digital native, proving that the chemical hook is stronger than the cultural taboo. As we stand at the end of this long, winding journey, looking back across the vista of 500 years, we see the terrifying majesty of this plant. Nicotiana has traveled from the sacred fires of the Amazon, where it carried prayers to the Creator, to the velvet lips of French queens seeking relief from pain. It has survived the fever swamps of Jamestown, the executioner a sword in Constantinople, and the mud of the trenches in 2 world wars. It has moved from the shaman's pouch to the courtier's snuff box, from the soldier's ration kit to the sterile laboratories of the vaping industry. It is the ultimate survivor, a biological entity that learned to hack the human reward system with a ruthless, evolutionary efficiency. It found the weakness in our neurology, the receptor that governs desire and satisfaction, and it built a home there. The story of tobacco is not merely the biography of a plant. It is a mirror reflecting our own nature. It reveals our desperate, timeless need for comfort in a harsh world. It exposes our susceptibility to illusion, our willingness to believe the advertisements of freedom even as we forge our own chains. And ultimately, it illuminates our eternal struggle to break free from the things we love that destroy us. The smoke clears, drifting away into the history books, but the hunger remains. The green gold, the devil swede, the herba regina, it watches us from the fields and the factories, swaying gently in the wind, indifferent to our laws and our lives, knowing that as long as there is a human heart that aches for a moment of peace, there will be a hand reaching for the leaf. The ember fades, but the fire in the blood burns on, eternal and unquenchable.